Okay, so we are going to talk about another way to find zeros, roots, x-intercepts, or solutions, which all mean the same thing, of quadratic equations in a different format. This is called the quadratic formula. This quadratic formula will be given to you on the star chart. It's just another method to find the 0, 1, or 2 solutions that might be on a quadratic equation on a graph. So this equation is opposite, and I know it says negative, but in my mind it means opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, okay? So where these a, b, c's come from is the quadratic equation, or the quadratic equation, yeah. So what that means is the standard equation for a quadratic formula or quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. So anytime I refer to a, b, or c, I'm referring to these values in this setup, okay? So for instance, number 1, or the first example, x squared minus 6x plus 4. The a would be 1, the b would be negative 6, and the c would be 4 here, okay? So we're literally just going to plug these into this formula. So, for instance, the opposite of b, so the opposite, or I guess it is a negative. Okay, never mind. So the negative of negative 6, I don't really like the way that's worded, but we'll keep it that way for this video. So the negative of negative 6, like that, plus or minus the square root of the b squared, which is negative 6 squared, minus 4 times a, which was 1, times c, which was 4. I'm sorry, it's a little tiny to write in, all over a denominator of 2 times a, which is 1 as well. And all you're literally going to do is type that in. So on your home screen, you're going to type it in like a fraction, alpha y1, and we're going to do negative parentheses negative 6 plus this, oops, oh man, okay, let's do it again. Alpha y1, negative parentheses negative 6 plus, because we're going to do this twice. We're going to do it with a plus, and then we're going to do it with a minus, plus the square root of the parentheses negative 6 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses 4 all over 2 parentheses 1. So it's a lot of typing, but it's pretty easy to set up. And you are going, and you could possibly get some crazy values. Let me make sure I did everything correctly. Minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so that means my first x-intercept will be a long and crazy decimal. We're going to round to the 10th place, I guess. So this one, my first x value would be 5.2. Now, instead of me having to retype this entire problem again, the only thing we're going to change is that plus to a minus. So we're going to change. You're going to go up to where it's highlighted blue, hit enter, and it copies and pastes. Then we're going to hit our arrows over to the plus. And don't hit delete. Just while it's flashing on the plus, you're going to put minus. And then you're just going to hit enter. And then it finds what happens whenever it is the positive. So what we're asking the calculator to do is tell me what the highest positive x-intercept is, and then tell me what the highest negative x-intercept is using this formula. So the other x-intercept would be 0.8 if we're rounding to the 10th place. So let's do this again. Number 1 here, okay. My equation here, so let's talk about our a, b, c value. My a value would be 1, my b value would be 10, my c value would be negative 2. And now we're just going to plug it into this formula. The negative of b would be 10, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 10, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And now we're just literally going to type that in. So again, alpha y1, where we have negative parentheses 10 plus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2 all over 2 times 1. So my initial x-intercept on the positive side would be 0.2. And your assignment may ask you to do the hundredths place. It just kind of depends. I haven't had a chance to look. We're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to pull up to here where it's blue and hit enter. And we're just going to change that positive to a minus, or that plus to a minus. So that way we're asking the calculator to get the negative side of it, which in this case would be negative 10.2. So the quadratic formula, honestly, the reason why we use the quadratic formula is whenever we can't factor. So there was no way for me to do this by factoring, because there is no numbers that I can multiply to 2 to subtract 10. Like, it's not logical, or it's not possible to do on paper. And if you look at our answers, we're getting all these random decimals. That's because it's not possible to factor by hand. So that's why we do it in the quadratic formula. Number 3, we still have to set equal to 0, so we need to move this 20 over to the left. So it ends up being x squared minus 8x minus 20, because we have to subtract 20 equals 0. So now my a value is 1, my b value is negative 8, and my c value is negative 20. And then we're going to plug everything in. The negative of b would be the negative of negative 8, plus or minus the square root of b, which is negative 8, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And then we're going to type this in, alpha y1, and we're going to do the negative of negative 8 plus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. This one does come out to be pretty. That's probably because I could have factored this if I really wanted to. But either way, they work. Both methods will be correct. It just depends on their solutions. So the positive side of my x solution would be 10. If I go up, copy and paste, and change that plus to a minus, it's the only detail I have to change. We're asking the calculator to find the negative side of it. So that negative solution is negative 2. On this one's already set into standard form. So my a value would be 1, my b value would be 6, my c value would be 10. So now I'm going to plug everything in. The negative of 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. And then we're just going to type that in again. So the negative of 6 plus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. Oops, what happened? Okay, so even though we'll go back to this here in a minute, but it looks like this one does not have a positive solution. So that means it won't cross the x-axis on a positive side. But let's try going and copying and changing it to the minus side. And that one doesn't as well. So what's going to happen there is this one has no solutions if it doesn't work either way. So in this particular case, if this happens, even if you typed it in all correctly and it still shows error in the calculator, what this means is that the graph of this equation is not going to touch the x-axis at all. So that's why it's called no solutions on this one. So don't be alarmed if that does happen. Number 7, it's already set equal to 0, so all we need to do is assign the values. The a would be negative 1, b would be 7, and c would be negative 3. So the negative of 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So a lot of plugging. We're going to type this in. So we have the negative of parentheses 7 plus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 3. All over 2 times negative 1. The positive side of this would be 0.5 if we round to the tenths place. If I copy and paste, and I scooch over to the plus sign. I want to change it to the minus sign, so that way we're finding the negative side of it, or the positive side. So my answer would be 6.5, okay? And then now we look at number 9. We have to set it equal to 0. So it kind of depends on whichever method you want to go about it. If we're so used to seeing everything on the right side move over to the left, then just move it on over. So for instance, I'm going to subtract 7 and I'm going to add x squared. But make sure you have it in the standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. So for instance, this one would be x squared plus 2x minus 7. Okay. Now I'm going to assign the values. So a would be 1, b would be 2, and c would be negative 7. Now that I plug it into the quadratic formula, the negative of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, and then I'm just going to plug that in. So I have the negative of b plus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. This one doesn't have a positive side solution, but you don't want to go just assume, so we're going to go do the opposite. We're going to change that to a minus, and it also says error as well. So that means this one will not have a solution as well. That means it will be a graph that does not touch the x-axis. Number 11, so this one, the a value is already, or it's set it to 0, so the a value is 2, the b value is 5, and the c value is 4. If I set it up in my quadratic formula, the negative of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, and then we're going to type that in. So it's the negative of b plus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Again, this one doesn't have any solutions. So at least the first one. So if we try it again and check the minus side, it doesn't have any, so this one would be no solutions as well. Okay, this one steps it up a little because there's a lot going on both sides. So I want to move everything over to the left. That means I'm going to subtract x squared from 3x squared. That means I'm going to add 2x to 7x. And that means I'm going to subtract 15 to over here. So 3x squared minus x squared is 2x squared. 7x plus 2x is 9x, and minus 15. My a value is 2, my b value is 9, and my c value is negative 15. So here the negative of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, which if we type that in, the negative of b plus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. We get along and crazy, so if we round to the tens place, it's 1.3. If we copy and paste, then we want to look for the minus side of it, which gives us negative 5.8.